All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the Stack Strength Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Daniel DeBrocke. And with me today, we're going to be talking with Andy Morgan. Do you prefer Andy or Andrew?
Andy, please. Andrew is only when I'm in trouble, and that it's been a long time.
Awesome. So we're going to be discussing weight fluctuations when dieting. And we've got a lot of really interesting things to cover. But before we do, first off, I wanted to say thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's great to have you here. Can you give a little bit of a background of yourself and kind of what you do in the industry for those who maybe aren't familiar with you?
Sure. So I'm not very stacked and I'm not very strong. So I'm a little surprised and honored to have you on. It means I've bluffed my way very well in this industry. It's because I hang out with stacked and strong people. So I'm the classic fake it till you make it guy. So you've had some guests on like Mike Toucher, Greg Knuckles, Eric Helms. I'm honored to consider these people friends. They are at a completely different level from myself. So my background for the last 11 years, I've coached. It's all been online. It's via two websites. There's ripbody.com and there's athletebody.jp. JP for Japan, but you may hear in my accent that I don't sound very Japanese. I'm British. And I moved out to Japan nearly 17 years ago now, after I graduated. I was teaching English, and then I ended up leaving that when I started writing for my friends in the gym who I felt they were getting ripped off by the supplement industry here. And I felt that that is more of a thing in Japan, and still is, because of the language barrier, because science is communicated primarily in English, and most Japanese people, vast majority of Japanese people, their English isn't good enough to even consider looking through information to find whether the stuff that's marketed to them is true or not. I just started writing, blogging in English, simple articles, having those translated into Japanese. And then I split off the original website. It's called ripbody.jp. I bought the .com for that, split it off onto the Japanese website. And we've just been on the Japanese website translating articles and now writing our own. I've got a team. And then on the articles focused on making things a little simpler for people. So whereas Eric Helms, that is, Greg Knuckles, Stronger by Science, Eric Trexler, many of the science heavy, mine would be still evidence-based, but just say a step down in the chain of simplifying things. So my customers tend to be they're knowledgeable, they're smart, they could do things for themselves, but they're just, they recognize that it's not really worth their time to go too heavy. Just it's better to spend their energies elsewhere. Identifying good information within our industry, because there's so much misinformation out there. So that's who I work with. And my reputation is essentially just simplifying things for people, writing guides for nutrition and training. It's mainly for novice/intermediate trainee who's frustrated. And I've just kind of written things and tried to make them too good to not share. And so in doing that, the articles get shared around the internet and all with friends, and they hire me. And that's what's kept me in fresh undies the last 11 years.
Awesome. You know what? One thing that I will say is I think you're being a little bit too modest. Probably one of the most important skills as a coach to have are the soft skills and being able to communicate information effectively to spur on the desired outcome. Because realistically, And it's funny, so I was on a podcast earlier this morning, and they were talking to me about like background and what do you think you need to study next, and it's just like I probably use about 1% of what I actually know on clients, realistically.
Hmm.
And
Mm.
you too, you know? It's like, but you could go off on all these tangents, but it's just not relevant. And so I think the big missing piece that's really been changing probably in the last handful of years has been a little bit more of a client-centered approach, a little bit more of a client-centered focus instead of being like, hey, let's use all this technical jargon to sort of pat ourselves on the back within, amongst our peers. And so that's something I've always seen you do really, really well at is take these kind of complex things and say, okay, how does that pertain to you as an individual? How can you use that in your own life, like literally tomorrow, to create some sort of change? And so that's one thing that I wanted to kind of highlight since you didn't really say it, but
Thank you. That actually, the way that I've trained myself to do that, because it doesn't come naturally, right?
Mhm.
It's not easy.
No, it's
Like I was reading an
ridiculous.
article by, yeah, I was reading an article by Paul Graham.
Mhm.
He's an investor. You can look it up. Very smart dude. I say article, an essay, and he was talking about the value of writing in clarifying your thinking. And then this idea that if you've had a thought but you haven't actually written it down, have you actually fully thought that thought yet? Because putting stuff into writing, actually trying to teach what you know, is a real test of whether you actually know it well and whether you can communicate that effectively with people. So one thing I've tried to encourage throughout the years, and I think is part of the reason why the disproportionately successful to the number of articles that I've put on it, is that I've really encouraged comments and reader feedback. And that has really called me on my shit straight away when I've screwed up. So someone's had a comment and they've like, oh, well, what does this mean? And I'm like, oh shit, yeah, I could have explained that better. So then I'll go back in and I'll rewrite and I'll say thank you and then I'll explain. And every time someone's done that, I've just gone back in and rewritten and improved things.
Mhm.
And I've tried to write the articles from the perspective of, okay, for the current clients that I'm coaching, what kind of article is going to be useful? So I work in email with clients, and you don't always want to, or it's not always a good idea to write exceptionally long emails, but giving enough depth and then linking out for further background should they want to read that. And then thinking what articles would be good for that. Often they've come from initial client communications that I thought, oh, I could expand on this and that would be an article and that would benefit this client and maybe clients for 6 years in the future and other people who maybe they will be clients at some point, or maybe they'll just be, the other 100 or 1,000 people that it's probably 1,000 to 1 people who read the website and actually become a customer. And that's great, right? Because we get to help way more people. So by putting that client and thinking trying to put myself in those shoes, trying to think through as I'm reading through my drafts again and again and again, how are they going to F this up when they read it? Like, how are they going to really screw this up? Okay, right. How am I going to What are the shorter sentences, shorter words, simpler words? What are the sketches that I can put in? Okay, now how can I make this shorter? Where are their attention spans going to wane? Right? Because if you lose their attention, you're done. One of the most humbling things I've ever done is I put a heat map, it's called, on the website, which tracks where people click, but also how far people scroll. And I know you know this. I can see that you're nodding, Daniel. But just for those listening who perhaps don't have a website, it can tell you how far people scroll in your articles, and it's really humbling because you realize that actually the bottom, and then so you can see like where people are dropping off, and then you can tweak things there. So that's something that I've focused on. And now, obviously, with social media, just the feedback is far more rapid.
Mhm.
I think it's good because you get to see, you have to understand that people have low attention spans and they're on their phones generally when they're responding with comments on social media. So you need to take what they say with a pinch of salt, because often they just haven't bothered to read. But many times it can still be useful in explanations, and helping me as a coach, my guys, my team, to improve, because that's what it's all about. Often the thing that the client needs in any given moment to push them forward, it's one or two things explained simply, so that they can keep it in their head, so that they can go on and execute it, and so that if they're asked, they can then go on and explain it to their people, their loved ones around them. I'm thinking more about the nutrition side of things now, rather than the training, where they're likely to get pushback and questions from loved ones when they won't have, 3 pints of the craft beer and a pizza in the evening. So that they can then explain that, specifically where they're at and why. And so that helps them too.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in fact, when I first started writing, everything was just a jumbled mess in my head, and it really does force you to clarify your thoughts a lot. And then same thing with speaking and presenting. Holy smokes, it's a completely different thing to know something and then just kind of coach it versus like communicating it to other people so they can understand at least to your level of depth. And you're like, oh, maybe I don't know this as well as I thought. And it takes a little while for you to kind of work through all the details. So I completely agree with that, which is another reason why I guess this leads into, the first question that I have, but another reason why education is such a fundamental component of the coaching process. It's like, as much as some people like, hey, some people just don't want to learn. It's like, those people probably won't see sustainable results unless they just have you for the rest of their life. And even then, they probably still won't see the same results. You just have to learn. There's certain things that you just can't get over. But that, like I said, that does kind of lead me into the first question that I do have for you is, how do you actually approach a weight monitoring strategy when dieting? Because sometimes people get pushed back, and I mean, there's a variety of different ways to do that. So how do you manage that?
I have my clients weigh themselves first thing in the morning after they've gone, and they do that every day, and then they note it at the end of a week. And just for context, and then just for further context, the majority of my clients, they're very familiar with the articles on my website, and I have written there how I get clients to track, what I get them to track, and why. And then I show in many, so there's the article I'm referring to, diet-progress-tracking. You can have a look there if you'd like. And there's 8 different things I get, 8 different categories of things I get clients to track. Maybe sounds overwhelming, but it just takes like 10 minutes once a week, other than the daily weigh-ins. And then from there, I show how I use that in the adjustments that I make for clients, and when I'm teaching the people who are reading the website how to interpret their data and then make adjustments from that for either their cutting phases, bulking phases, coming back to maintenance, transitioning between the 3, and what they need to expect. And so, because the majority of clients are familiar with the website, and that's frankly what I want, is what I'm looking for in their application forms, because they make the best clients, right? Their heads aren't in a completely different place, right? They've maybe been jerked around by the supplement industry, right? And now they've been spat out, and now they're looking for something that's actually they're ready, right, for something that has no shine and fancy promises to it, right? It's like, okay, we're going to track things, and we're going to make some sensible, small, incremental adjustments, and only adjust when absolutely necessary, right? And so I write about that all over the website. And so, because they're familiar with my stuff, I don't get pushback when it comes to the request of weigh yourself daily, because they already know why I do that and how it's valuable. And if they were someone who was like, well, I can't weigh myself daily, then either they would read the website and become convinced, or they would just go elsewhere. They wouldn't consider hiring me in the first place.
Mhm.
So it's not a battle that I have to fight. However, that doesn't mean that I don't understand why people have this battle. It just means that I don't have a lot of conversations that's of it.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great sort of funnel, right? Is it gives people the resources until they kind of build up to the point where they feel confident enough to actually, reach out to you and say, hey, you know what, I'm ready to take it to the next level. Let's get some coaching. Let's do all this stuff. And then it also manages expectations, which is hugely important for clients. So I'm I mean, I'm not so big anymore. I think I'm like at 259 this morning. I used to be about 290 almost. I've been cutting weight the last little while. And but usually, like when I do a check-in with someone, or if I do like an initial needs analysis or an onboarding call or something, I
Mm.
very often get, "Oh, wow, you're, like, so soft-spoken and da da da," like, "I never would have thought you're, like, this big, tatted, scary dude." I'm just like, "Yeah, okay." But there so there's this sort of, like, disconnect between the perception of what they're gonna get versus what they actually get. And so I think it's really great that while you're going through that process, you don't even have to be there. You're just
Yeah.
leveraging your content. I think that's fantastic. I sent articles to people before as well, but they're a little bit different. They're a little bit more dense. They're not as user friendly as yours, I guess.
Uh-huh. Well, I mean, if you have a successful coaching business and you're getting the clients that you want to work with, then hey, look, it's serving a purpose, right?
Mhm.
This is, I would just like to expand on that point. This is a wonderful thing about the internet. This is something that I identified 11 years ago when I was thinking, okay, I want to get out of high school teaching because it's a fixed salary. My time is not my own, and it wasn't really scratching my entrepreneurial itch. I thought at the time, okay, well, I can build this website in Japanese. I can help out my friends in this gym who are, it's in a really poor area. They're all working class. They don't have a lot of money, but they're wasting maybe $300, $400 on supplements each month because they're all bodybuilders, all powerlifters. But it's like 80% bodybuilders. Pretty much no one at that gym didn't compete, whether that be platform or stage. And it broke my heart to see them just spending so much money on shit they didn't need. And so I felt that, okay, I can put up a website, a blog, just a simple blog. Website's a scary word. Write my thoughts on there. That will serve as my online business card. Business cards are still a thing in Japan, but like people can get to know who I am, and that can sell them on me before they even meet me. And now blogs, they're less in vogue. I still think they're exceptionally useful. What's generated the majority of clients of business. But now we get social media as well. Instagram is where we know each other from. Obviously, we're connected via various people as well. But yeah, we get to show people who we are and what we're about before they even see us. So if anyone had to come across your Instagram, they would realize, although you don't do as much speaking stuff, you do have quite a lot of text stuff. But so they may not come across your spoken stuff and realize that actually you're calmly, softly spoken, maybe softly compared with how you look. You're a calmly spoken, very methodical, rational guy, right?
Yeah,
Who,
thanks.
and that to
Try
me
not
is trustworthy.
try not to be too crazy. There's certain things that definitely rub me the wrong way, but
Mm.
try and contain myself when I'm speaking about them a little. I'll kind of write a post and I'll read it and I'm like, nah, I can't say that. Rewrite it, and I'm like, okay, that's the message that I want to get, and it's not necessarily like pointing a finger at anyone.
You
Sometimes
know,
you get emotional, you get heated, you get passionate about a certain subject, and it just doesn't come out quite as clear as you want it.
yeah, you got to be careful when you're of a certain size
Mhm.
and look, that when you do get angry, because you will scare the hell out of people around you. But
Yeah. It's funny actually. So this is totally like off topic. because like when you're well, yeah, you're European as well, right? Like, so you
Yeah, I'm
talk
English.
like, culturally, it's very normal to get very passionate about something you're talking about. Whereas I'm in Canada right now, so if like I'll be talking to like my sister about something, and we're both like really going up, and then they're like, "Oh, like yo, calm down, you guys. Like, you don't fight." And we're like, "Oh, we're not fighting. Like, it's
Mm,
just how we talk. We're
mm.
just both really engaged." And it's so funny, like the dichotomy between cultures. But I guess I digress. So.
And I'll add just before
Mm,
there, there's one thing I noticed that generally the bigger, the more capable. I came to Japan for martial arts, and I did that for quite a number of years. Generally, the bigger and or the more capable, just to prove, right? There's nothing to prove. So for like
mm,
the what I'd say is this is me speaking to my younger self who might be listening to your podcast right now, right? It's the guys who run their big mouths are generally less capable, but are less predictable. The
yeah.
ones who are quiet and calm, they're the ones that well, you're not going to have trouble with them, but you definitely wouldn't want to mess with,
Mhm.
or it's probably best that you don't mess with. But the ones that they're um, yeah, they're generally the ones who um, have the most to say, the least capable.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Kind of runs, yeah.
It's a pretty accurate heuristic, especially in martial arts and things like that. So, um, so
Anyway,
getting back to yeah, getting back to like um, client management.
yeah,
So there's always going to be times during a diet phase where the scale just isn't tipping in the right direction. You are in a calorie deficit. And so this is a big one. A lot of the times people aren't in a calorie deficit, and that's the reason why they're not losing weight. But there are many, many times where I'm sure you've experienced this as well, where you have a client, they are meticulous. They're not messing anything up. They're doing everything right. They're hitting their calories, they're hitting their macros. But then they just kind of hit this period where their weight is just kind of stagnant and it doesn't seem to be changing, even though they're in a calorie deficit. And that can be very difficult psychologically, um, because even in those instances, let's say you increase step count or you increase cardio, or you find some other way to increase energy expenditure, and the weight still stagnates. So it's not an energy expenditure issue. You know that there's something else going on. So how do you navigate, first and foremost, how do you navigate the like troubleshooting that situation, and then second, how do you actually communicate with your athlete or your client, um, what that situation is and what needs to be done to move forward? Because I know personally, even right now going through a cut, that's something that can be very, very frustrating and kind of demoralizing because you are putting in so much work.
so there's a couple of ways I could do it. Certainly for non that I've written, or I could give them a copy of my book, the Diet Adjustments Manual. I don't know if you know about that one. You know about the muscle and strength pyramids that I wrote with Eric and Andrew, but yeah, the I could give them a copy of a book where I talk through things there, or link them to a quick Instagram video, depending on what level of patience and time I think they have for these things. And that obviously depends on the person. But obviously in the email, I'd just explain it as kind of as follows. So you had a podcast with G-Nuck, where he talked Greg Knuckles, and 35 or something like that. I was listening to it yesterday, and he was explaining all of the different factors of how our energy needs change as we diet. They decrease, and broadly speaking, as we go through a gaining phase. And while the overall magnitude of all of these changes can add up to a lot, and Greg was talking about how he had gone from, I think, 279 pounds at his zenith, he called it, and now he's at something like 225. So over 50 pounds of at that point, it's going to be something like 45 pounds of fat loss, maybe 10 pounds of water, gut content, glycogen, something like that, perhaps. Let's call it 50 pounds of fat loss. That's a lot. And his daily maintenance has gone from something like 3,500 to 2,500 calories, unfortunately. So there can be large magnitudes in drops in energy needs. But none of these things happen overnight. And so if you have been on point with your diet and your activity levels have not changed, and the rate of weight change suddenly stops, then we know that you must just be holding on to water, or perhaps you had an extra carby meal, you got some more gut content. But essentially, it's just that. And so I say to them, look, it is happening. We're not always going to be able to see it. I address this in advance when they become a client. I say, this is going to happen. So prepare yourself. That doesn't mean it actually always will for all clients, but, just tell them that it will at the start, just to set the expectations. And then I just say, look, keep calm. And I try to coach them to take motivation in the fact that they are still executing their adherence to their diet and their training in the day-to-day. And so then I try and shift their mindset away from what is the scale, what are we doing? Because the progress that we see, that's a lagging indicator of the habits, the habits that we've set and the actions that we're doing in many cases. Explain it. And then let's say a client has a sudden spike in weight. And again, this is in the dieting context. Then I just say, hey, well, did you eat like off plan? Yeah, I had like a half of a pizza. It was only a small one, and a few craft beers the other night. We're just, it happened. So I'm like, okay, well, and they've gained like 4 pounds or 2 kilos. And I'm like, okay. And they're a bit down about it. I'm like, right, well, what does that mean? Well, let's do a little bit of math here. If it takes 3,500 calories, or 3,500 calories to store a pound of fat, or 7,700 calories to store a kilogram of fat, what might this pizza and beer run have been? Well, maybe 2,000 calories at the max. And let's say that that was your evening meal, and you had like a breakfast and a lunch, and then the total that you consumed that day was, say, 4,000 calories, but your target at this point is now 2,000 calories. Well, that means we went 2,000 calories over. Now, you aren't going to store that 2,000 calories perfectly as fat, but let's say that we did. And if they like pick up on that and they're like, well, what can happen there, Andy? And I can talk about thermic effect of food and like all of that kind of shit, but generally it's not the point that the client wants to focus on. So let's say that was perfectly stored. Well, that would mean that you've got 4/7 of a pound of fat that's stored, or 2/8 of a kilo of fat has been stored, but your weight has gone up by, as I said, 4 pounds, 2 kilos. It cannot be all fat. And what I've just said is the worst case. Therefore, keep calm, carry on, don't worry. You're going to see a whoosh down over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 days. And yeah, I promise you, don't worry about it. By the time of our next check-in in 2 weeks, it's all going to be good. And maybe we can have a little bit of back and forth about on that if necessary. But generally what happens is they see these things themselves. And so they just get used to it over time. And that's also one of the reasons that I have check-ins every couple of weeks. It's not just message me whenever you like. It's an email check-in every 2 weeks, because I want them to see that these swings happen so that they aren't checking in with panic in any given moment. that's how I approach that.
No, I think that's fantastic. And a lot of the times it's so critical to sort of differentiate between, how you feel about a particular subject versus what's actually going on. And so the fact that you take that sort of methodical approach and like, okay, here's this. Are you with me? Here's this. Are you still with me? Here's this. Are you still with me? It's like if they can say yes up to that point, and then you're like, okay, so is it possible that you gain, 2 kilos? They're like, well, no. It's like, okay, so what do you think it might be? And then they can answer for themselves, and it is kind of alleviating once you sort of understand that. And so I really love that approach of conversation, and I think the soft skills of coaching, that discussion piece, is absolutely critical. And so one of the things that I really think is probably, I'm going to say it's probably more important than the actual program itself, which is a very bold statement. And I might be wrong, but it's something that I've been suspecting for the last several months anyways, is that the relationship you have with your client is probably more important than the actual program itself, in the sense that you can actually get more buy-in. You get them to really like trust you and appreciate that you've got their best interest in mind, that you're not going to lead them astray, that you know what you're doing, and that if they just kind of, because sometimes people can't believe in themselves, like they doubt, and that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why people get coaches in the first place, is they're just like, they might be doing all the right things, but not for a long enough period, because they question themselves 3 weeks in and then just say fuck it and throw their hands in the air.
Yeah.
But when they do that with you, you're there to kind of calm them down, guide them again, and so they can kind of persist. And so sometimes it's really important, but I really love that approach that you take with the clients on that, and kind of walk them through that, because that is a very jarring experience. But then after you've had it 3 or 4 times, it sort of becomes insignificant almost. You're like, I've been here before,
Yeah, exactly. You get it. There's a couple of things I'd like to pull apart there. One is the client believing in themselves. If they believe in us as the coach, then they are way more likely to follow through and not question things. They're likely to train harder. It's not that we don't want them to question things, but like sometimes progress isn't going to show up linearly, as we said, and they just need to trust in the process. Like definitely when it comes to like strength, once you pass a certain level, definitely when it comes to muscle growth, right? Like, you just cannot see that on a week to week or necessarily a month to month basis and pick that apart from fat concretely. So that plus what we can also do, one thing I've really tried to encourage my clients to do without forcing them, but is to be open to sharing their journey. And so I put something like 100 before and after photos on the website, on the results page, rickbody.com results, if anyone wants to have a look and see kind of the tone that I take with that. I've got some videos on there, but scroll down to the pictures. That's where I'm mainly thinking. And the client is talking through what they were frustrated with, how the coaching helped them, and what the takeaways were for anyone who is looking to do this themselves. It's not why they should hire Andy. Like, I'm not making myself the center of attention here. It's like, or one of my team. It's like, what's the takeaway lesson for those looking to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And often it is a case of patience, right? And diligent tracking and trying not to get emotional in any given moment. Now, the other thing you mentioned, just to wrap up kind of the scale weight fluctuations piece for anyone who's reluctant to do it. If I were to have that conversation, let's say they haven't bought into the idea that they're going to weigh themselves every day, and so they haven't had a chance to see all of this happen yet, right? Let's say I've got someone who's just super reluctant. I wouldn't be working with them, but let's say they're a friend, and they're like, no, I can't do it. Well, then the framework that I'd think through is, okay, well, number one, do they need to track their weight to see progress where they are currently at? If the answer is no, then I might just be like, hey, you want to get into, or do you have a pair of jeans now? Like, you can just kind of see the differences there in how they're going to fit over time, right? So look, you're going to do these things, and then is that's when it may be a good idea to start weighing and measuring yourself. Is that cool? All right, cool. All right, great. Now, at that point that they're then frustrated, and I think a little bit of frustration is key because it putting in a bit more effort here. And that's the same thing for all things, right? That's when I'd say to them, all right, so coming back to the scale thing, I want you to weigh yourself last thing at night and weigh yourself first thing in the morning. Tell me what you get. And they're like, wow, it's like half a pound. It's because you lose water when you breathe overnight. And maybe you sweat a little because it's the summer. And I'm like, oh, right, okay, yeah. It's like, cool. Right now, I want you to weigh yourself after you went to the toilet in the morning. Compare that with before. Compare it with pre and post breakfast. Then do a mid-afternoon and then do at night again. And I want you to just note that down. It's like, well, what's going on here? And they're like, wow, yeah, it's kind of fluctuating a bit. It's like, cool, yeah, hasn't it just? Okay, now I want you to have a bit of extra salt on your scrambled eggs at breakfast tomorrow and then see how your weight's doing like by mid-afternoon. Has that gone up considerably since yesterday? It's like, yeah, but it's the same breakfast, right? And they're like, yeah. It's like, wow, there you go. So now you know, not on that calories don't count train, you know that can't be fat. I can explain that a bit of salt increases water in the body, etc. But you know that can't be fat. You can see that there are these fluctuations. So what we need to do is take our weight at the same time of day and then average it out so that we can get around this noise in the data and see the underlying progress. Does that make sense? And that's perhaps like the framework I'd use for explaining it to someone who's reluctant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense as well, right? It's sort of like a graded exposure approach, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of misconceptions regarding weight management and what the process looks like. And so when you're working with a client, and I'm sure that at some point you've worked with individuals who come in with pre-existing notions in terms of what works, what they have to do, versus what's probably actually going to work a little bit better for them. So in those instances, I've actually depending on what it is, actually, I might have a conversation with them about it and try and kind of convince them against it. If I suspect that they're pretty like dead set in it, especially if they're new, sometimes I actually will just let them do it and be like, here's what I think is going to happen, but let's try it out. If you really think so, here's why I think that's not going to be true. But if you really want to do it and you're going to set dead set on doing it, then okay, let's try it out. And then when it fails, I can be like, hey, so that went exactly how I said it did, didn't it? And they're like, yeah. And then it's like, all right, cool. So that gets a little bit of buy-in, but that's not always the case. And I mean, sometimes some of the things they want to do are actually potentially dangerous to themselves. So that's obviously not something I'd be comfortable doing, putting them at risk for whatever reason. So, I'd be interested to hear how you tackle those situations sometimes. Like I gave one example, but there's a million different ways of approaching it, I guess. So how do you navigate those conversations?
Could you give me, say, a nutrition example, and then I
Sure.
will.
So, hey, I want to lose weight and get lean. I'd like to compete in this bodybuilding show, but I've been reading about the carb insulin hypothesis, and I really want to go keto. Something along those lines.
Oh, okay. So it's tricky, right? Because if you, at that point, you don't necessarily know the rabbit hole this person has gone with that, how big their buy-in to that idea is, whether you're treading on any quote unquote sacred beliefs. So if you kind of try to fight it straight up, it could backfire, and it could be like, nah, who's this guy? He's a dick. He's one of them, right? So, it's different strokes for different folks, and you have to know whether you have to kind of make a call, or try to make a call, because every ounce of my being just wants to be like, no, that's it's fucking dumb. Like, this guy is like one of the most insidious charlatans. Won't name any names, but like in our industry, they're talking obvious bunk. It's that they're talking it's pseudoscience, right? It sounds like science. And yeah, you could go down that train. This isn't something that I typically get, as you may be able to tell. And again, it's because of the content that I put out. Like, we attract clients based on the content that we generally put out, right? One approach would be, as you said, to be like, okay, well, we can do a higher fat diet and roll with it for a while and see how you do, and then adjust from there. Would that be all right with you? And then, like, yeah, it's like, great. So just to clarify on the adjustment thing, what we're going to do, I'm going to give you a set amount of protein and fat and vegetables, mainly. And I guess, again, it depends. What is keto? Like, a lot of people, they don't think keto as we do, which is 50 grams or under, like that kind of carbohydrates. So you can just, yeah, I guess, let them run with it and then see how it goes, and tell them, okay, well, if it stops working, then we are going to drop your calorie intake to make it lower. If things stop working, which they won't, according to your man, but you know, that's the approach that I've done successfully with clients, you know, throughout the years.
Mm-hmm.
I guess if it were someone to that extent, they just wouldn't want to hire me, and I don't know how I could approach it if they weren't open to that. I would want to check that my way of looking at things and adjusting things for people, they were on board with at first.
Mm-hmm.
Because if not, what are they going to come back with? Oh, well, we're not high fat enough? Or is it, oh, well, the protein is causing too much of an insulin spike, and then that is blocking, and then what, protein goes down?
Yeah.
They're now losing muscle mass. Well, they wouldn't necessarily be losing muscle mass, but they're just certainly not making the most of their training. I say not losing muscle mass because they're still probably at calorie maintenance or above. I don't know. That particular one is a tricky one. But I think your approach of explaining, allowing, saying what's going to, what the approach will be if or when things stop working, and stop working after a time with dieting or training, and then we will need to make tweaks. And here's the framework that I think through in how to make tweaks, and ask them if they're on board with that. And I've got an article, as you may have guessed, on covering like you know, the framework in which that I troubleshoot diet program. And if they're on board, cool. And if not, then I guess they're gonna hire someone else and be frustrated for a while.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. And I've definitely run into situations where I've had to just say, hey, you know what? I don't know that this would be a good fit. I know a lot of people sometimes will brag about, oh, I fired a client. I've only quote unquote fired one client in like across like 10 years of coaching. So I don't think that's really a strategy, but I definitely think that there have been instances, only a handful, I think. So I've been pretty lucky as well, where I get someone, I'm like, you know what? I don't know if I'm a good fit. So I had someone who had an eating disorder, and they had a full-blown eating disorder. And I've dealt with quite a few people like that before, so I'm very familiar with it. And like, but the issue with this one was they weren't willing to see a clinician. And so for me, that was kind of a non sequitur. I was just like, you know, I just don't feel comfortable working with you unless you're simultaneously working with a clinician. They said they didn't want to. And I was like, you know what? Okay, maybe I'm not the right guy for you. Here's some people who are registered dietitians who do specialize in these things. I'd highly recommend you check them out. But again, they're pretty few and far between. But and yeah, I mean that just goes back to kind of what we were talking about in the beginning about how important that communication aspect and the client relationship is. But we are coming up on that kind of time cap, and so I wanted to be respectful of your time. So where can people find you, Andy?
Ripbody.com. Or on Instagram, it's Andy_ripbody. That's a brand, not necessarily a description.
Awesome. So all that stuff's going to be linked up in the show notes, guys. Definitely go make sure you give him a follow, check out his page and his website. He puts out tons of great content on a regular basis. Andy, thank you so much for jumping on, man. It's been great chatting with you.
Thank you for having me, Daniel. Honored. And for those who've listened to the end, I really appreciate your ears. Thank you.